Howdy friends, welcome to another episode of Escaping the Cave, Toddzilla X-Pod at escapingthecave.com. I am your friendly, that term is relative, friendly host Todd, and I am relatively friendly in this episode this week compared to last week anyway. My menstrual cycle has wound down apparently. Hope you're having a good week. We record these shows here in Michigan. We've had a hell of a week. Plot against our Governor Gretchen Whitmer foiled. Kidnapping plot. Engineered by a bunch of militia groups here in the state. We have a lot of militia groups in the state of Michigan. We're sort of known for it, going all the way back to Oklahoma City. Timothy McVeigh, Terry Nichols, Michigan ties. Michigan militia ties. All the way back to 1995. Sort of ingrained in the culture here in the state. Well, after this plot, this episode, and after being off for a couple of weeks with Brian anyway, he hasn't been here in 2 weeks. A lot of this show talks about the militia, the militias. And if you've been missing the politics that I used to talk about quite a bit, if you've missed politics in general, this is maybe the episode for you. We can't help it. It's impossible not to talk about politics these days. With everything with Trump and the coronavirus, the election, now this, it's like a vortex you can't escape. It's like a black hole. It keeps sucking you in. That was an actual recording of a black hole right there. There it is again. Did you hear it? That's a black hole. That's what black holes sound like. So yeah, this episode, I don't know if it's dark. I wouldn't necessarily characterize it that way, but it's honest. Not talking about the academic foundations of propaganda for the entire episode. But we do talk about propaganda. We also talk about killing norms, data overload. Some of the stuff I've already covered. Cover it with Brian today. Agitation. Manchurian propagandists as well. Propagandists that don't know the propagandists. They have just taken on the traits of Joseph Goebbels without knowing it because they've seen it everywhere. How propaganda might be suffocating the informational ecosystem and replacing it. Oh, that's fun. That's fun to think about. Talk about free speech and the responsibility that comes with free speech. And when that responsibility is abandoned, does the right of free speech, or do the problems that come with the right of free speech outweigh the benefits and the rights of free speech themselves? It's a valid question. It's been asked before. Devil's advocate, perhaps it should be asked again. Propaganda and information. Jacques Ellul put forth in his book, Propaganda, that the two are pretty much indistinguishable. That's a scary thought. We get into that today. We talk about journalism as well, subliminal editorializing. And back to the extremist stuff, talking about how this could be the tip of the iceberg, how the bulk of this massive extremist berg could be hidden beneath the black churning sea of extremism, out of sight, out of mind. Are you aware how pervasive these movements are? How many people are involved in them? Also, start to try to understand these guys. Again, devil's advocate. And finally, I pivot the conversation to colonialism. Yeah, socialist colonialism. Hear that phrase a lot in the woke flake rhetoric these days from the far left. Colonialism, you're all colonists. You're imperialists. 100 years. The rhetoric's 100 years old. So I start talking about socialist colonialism. The invaders from the East. Should be fun to listen to if you haven't heard me talk about that before. Talk about self-interest, how one specific group in this country, maybe two, are expected to climb upon the altar of social justice and sacrifice themselves for the benefit of someone else. Is that rational? Is that to be expected? Should you be surprised when people refuse to subjugate their self-interest to someone else's? Where is the moral certitude, the moral imperative? Is that the kind of fanaticism that Joan Didion was talking about in her essay? I believe it's a moral imperative that you sacrifice yourself to the good of someone else. And should you really be surprised? Maybe I'm being redundant. We get into this later in the episode. Perhaps I should shut up right now. But really, should you be shocked when someone refuses to abandon their own personal self-interest? And finally, we start talking about the religious aspects of socialism. I'll probably tag this episode with a little bit more on that. This is episode number 91. It was recorded on October the 11th and released on October 12th of 2020. How are you? Are you there?
Hey, good.
Okay.
Good. Yeah, I'm good. I was just I was drinking water right when you said that.
It's hell when you're not in the studio. You know, if you were right here, if we were in the same room, I could look across and say, "Oh, he's drinking water. Maybe I shouldn't throw it to him right now."
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's good. I just needed a quick hit of some water. Good to be back.
Yeah, I've got matcha, I've got coffee, I've got water, and then I've got a thermos of green tea up here.
I love that matcha. That matcha tea though, that's some good stuff. It really gets you a good pickup.
Yeah,
it's like being energized without being wired.
That's exactly it.
It's really nice, and that goes back millennia. You know, that's that green tea that's been pulverized and powdered, and so you're actually not just steeping leaves in water and drinking this leaf water. You're actually drinking the leaves.
Getting every single nutrient in the leaf.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah. Stuff's not cheap though.
Yeah, terribly expensive, but it's more one of those buzzes for me anyway. I don't know how it affects you, but it's not like a physical jittery kind of, like you're on cocaine kind of buzz. It just sort of wakes the brain up a little bit.
Do you make it like in a traditional sort of ritualistic way, or do you just kind of stir it up in a cup?
I tried the paste thing once. And that was maddening.
No, I just use the little bowl, and I have the little whisk, and I whip it up into a nice little froth, and then I drink it. And I like that. There's a little bit of a ritualistic to it. It's not like just grabbing a cup of coffee. There's some mindfulness involved in making a cup of matcha, and I like that a lot.
I did try it. I tried to get to that point. I don't have the whisk or anything like that. I don't remember what I used. It was real trailer trash matcha. There's a band name for you right there. Trailer trash matcha.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Brilliant. I'm just the kind of guy that I just like to mix it and slam it. That's my ritual, is drinking it and getting it.
Yeah.
So
that's good stuff.
Yeah, I've started coffee again. I was off coffee for a few months, and I. Just drinking solely tea from like May, I think, through probably the middle of last month. And I went back. I had one cup of coffee.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
I
still have my morning cup, because we are men of a certain age.
Yes.
So if I drink too late in the day, I'm up all night. So I have to stop in the morning. I have my morning cup usually on the drive to work, which is just long enough for me to finish a thermos, and then it's tea for the rest of the day, which is like half the caffeine of a cup of coffee. So, and then by about 2:00, I'm pretty much off of all of it.
Yeah, I have to stop probably around 5 or 6, 7 at the latest. I can have a little.
Do you remember the days when we could sit in the studio drinking coffee all night long and then go home and just go right to bed? You know what I mean? You just go to sleep.
Yeah, what is that? What's the physiological explanation behind that not happening at this age anymore?
I think we're just slowly falling apart. No, it has to do with resilience and processing, and I'm not the expert in that, but metabolism changes and all those kind of things, how we absorb chemicals and how we rebound from drinking bad things. For example, I don't really drink much, and not for particularly any reason that I've done anything wrong or think that I was ever an alcoholic or anything like that. It's just that well, it's just now it's just like if I drink more than 2 drinks in an evening, I feel it for 2 days.
Oh, I do know.
Yeah, so that's why I really don't drink anymore, because I just don't like the way it feels afterwards.
The last time that I think I had any significant amount of alcohol was New Year's Eve, and it wasn't even that much, and I felt it. January 1st, I was like, why do I do this? Whenever I get invited to go out, like my girlfriend's cousins like to have us over, play games and have drinks and stuff like that. It's just like, I can't drink. I have this knowledge in my head that I know what tomorrow's going to look and feel like if I go have more than 3 beers. I'm done.
I'm
wiped out.
And it's just not fun.
No.
It's just not fun. So and it's because you get to, it's the way you process things, and it's that recovery that you just don't have. Because when you're 25, you can drink a whole plate of Jell-O shots and be fine the next day, or at least functioning. If I drink a whole plate of Jell-O shots right now, I'd be off work for a week. Honest to God.
I know. Yeah. I was in my mid-20s, mid-late 20s, probably the latest I did this, but we'd go out and drink. My friends and I would go out drinking, raising hell till 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, yeah.
And we'd get home, and we'd be up at 8 o'clock to go play softball all day long in some tournament, 3 hours away.
Yep.
And I functioned. I did well. I had no problem with it. I just, well, that was the days of mini thins, if you remember that, when they had the ephedrine in them. So,
I never got into those.
Yeah, they were great. Oh, they were great. You'd run your hand through your hair, and it felt like you had little bugs. Like it would just tingle, like your head was, your hairline was being covered with ants or something.
Oh my gosh, I get that feeling with Sudafed. Just the regular dose, just if I take a regular, like a normal, prescribed dose. Yeah. But I feel like my hair is tingling.
That's the same stuff. That's got ephedrine in it.
Is that what that is?
Yeah, they used to make meth out of that. That's why they took it off the shelves, because you have to get a prescription for it now, I do believe.
Oh, no shit. And I'll tell you what I know about making meth. Wait, no, I watched Breaking Bad, so I figured, okay.
That's the only reason I knew that about Sudafed, too.
Pseudo, they call it pseudo. Get me a case of pseudo.
Yeah, but that's the ingredient, the ephedrine, and we smoked back then, and it's a bronchial dilator. And so you'd pop 3 or 4 of those mini thins, and you're rolling. You're crystal clear. Your head feels great, and you can breathe after smoking a pack of cigarettes.
Holy moly! But it's terribly bad for you. It's really bad stuff.
I want it. I want it back on the shelves. See, this is why I'm a libertarian. I feel like I should be able to make my own choices about my own.
You probably should, but it's the few that kind of fuck it up for the rest of us.
Yeah, I'm pretty convinced. Had I been able to make all the choices that I wanted to make over my life, I'd be dead by now. Pretty sure. Pretty sure.
Yeah, I could probably not disagree with that.
So, how's your Trump doing today, Brian?
Oh, man, not good.
I'm trying to decide, do we want to talk about Trump or the kidnapping plot first? We got to talk politics today. For the listeners, we don't typically talk a lot of politics on the show. It's usually propaganda, psychology, that kind of thing. Sort of the interface with all that, with technology and how it's affecting us and taking us to hell. We can't avoid politics this week.
I really don't think we can. I mean, especially since, with the whole thing with the governor of Michigan and this militia group and all it's just been top of mind nationally. Yeah. I just don't think we can avoid not talking about it,
Yeah, you weren't here last week. I did a solo episode after Trump was diagnosed with his COVID. Did you wish him well? Did you have well wishes for his health and well-being, Brian?
Well, I never want anybody to, die from an illness. That's just not a normal way to, I think. But
really?
Are
you sure? No. Are you sure?
I am sure. Yeah, I am sure.
I don't know if it's an acceptable way to think, but I think it's a pretty normal way for a lot of people to think.
I think sometimes folks would, it's like, well, serves you right. I guess that was my first inclination. I don't wish the guy dead. Of course not. But, or to become debilitatingly ill. But the first instinct is, well, hey, you kind of flaunted it in front of fate, and now you're sick. There you go.
Karma.
That's what happens. Yeah, that's what happens.
My first thought, and I said this on the show last week. Did you listen to that by any chance? Probably not.
No.
Okay. You'll laugh if you go back and listen to it now.
Okay.
But my first inclination when I found out he had COVID was, you dumb fucker. Yes, there is a God.
Right.
I may go to church this week, that kind of thing, because it's just the irony. It's just perfect comedy. You couldn't write it any better than that. Mm-hmm. That was my first thought. And serves him right, hope he gets sick. Second thought was, holy crap, this is almost like divine intervention. This is the one possible decent outcome to Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, the Donald Trump problem is taken care of. Potentially. Could be.
That opens up a whole can of shit that I don't even want to get into.
Yeah, one of the ingredients in that can is not Donald Trump. That was my thinking. I understand. I'm completely with you. It throws a constitutional crisis.
Oh, my
What do you do
God.
with the election? all sorts of other things.
Well, actually, no. All that stuff is written and figured out. I mean, it becomes very simple. If something were to happen to the president, there's a clear line of succession, even during an election, and then even during the period of time between an election and an inauguration, there were clear guidelines for that too. I don't think if anything were to happen to the president, and I don't wish him poorly in that regard. I don't think that's a constitutional crisis.
It is a constitution. Okay, who is the nominee in the election in 3 weeks?
Mike Pence.
Mike Pence automatically gets the Republican nomination as vice president. He does. Is that
as
written?
Vice president?
That's written somewhere.
Absolutely, the vice president takes over as president.
Right, but well, okay, I guess. But they went through a nomination process to nominate Trump
and Pence. They're nominated together.
Okay. No, I'm not arguing with you. You're sure about that?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
All right. Well, that was one of the questions that I had, because then you'd have this: how do the Republicans decide who they're going to put on the ballot in 3 weeks against Joe Biden after this entire campaign? If it is Pence, I guess that makes a lot of. I would assume it would be.
Yeah, and maybe it's a situation where he fills in as president, and then he would fall. He's still the vice president, right?
Right.
And so if anything happens to the president, he becomes the de facto acting president, or becomes the president just by constitutional authority.
Right.
And even in an election. That's how that happens. And so then it does become an issue where I think the House has to get involved. I'm sure the House would get involved. I'm sure it would become a clusterfuck, even though it's still pretty well written out in the Constitution. It's very well outlined how this stuff works.
Okay.
And any constitutional authority can tell you. But it's when we kind of start getting our political greasy fingers in the mix, that's when it becomes a mess.
Yeah.
Right. Like, for example, I'm not thrilled that the president is appointing a justice on the Supreme Court, not a chief justice, but a justice on the Supreme Court. I don't like the choice. I don't like the president. I don't like the choice for Supreme Court justice. Does he have the right to do that? Absolutely. Did Mitch McConnell cockblock us when the seat was open after Scalia passed? Absolutely, he did. That was a mess. But the fact that the president has the authority, that's one of the things that the Constitution really lays out very clearly. As long as he's a president, he gets to appoint justices, whether we like it or not.
Yeah. And the one thing I didn't understand, I think 4 years ago when this happened with Gorsuch, when Mitch McConnell, as you very artistically put it, cock-blocked the Obama's appointment, that wasn't unprecedented. It's happened, I guess, several times. And the way the rhetoric goes, and I do have some gaps in my history. Sometimes civics bore me. So I have some gaps in that area. But I didn't realize the way that they were talking 4 years ago was that this has never happened before. There has never been a divided, the executive
happens all the time.
And the legislative branch are divided, so therefore the Supreme Court nominee doesn't get through in an election year. They made it sound like it had never happened, and this was a norm that was just being exploded on stage, right? That's not true. It's happened several times.
Well, anytime you have opposite parties in the executive branch and in the Senate, this is a problem, right? Right now, it's just sliding through because you've got the same party in both branches, and the House is basically a non sequitur in this discussion. This is constitutionally a choice of the president and the Senate. That's it. And anytime you have, one or the other, the opposite party, this comes up, right? And the other party doesn't want it to go through. And if you know how to play the game better than the other guy, nothing wrong technically has really happened, whether it was through Gorsuch, whether it was the Gorsuch after Scalia passed away, or whether in this case, it's just that it just seems like McConnell was able to play the game better, and he used every tool in his toolbox to make sure that that Obama did not get to appoint Gorsuch, which it pissed off a lot of people. But was there anything constitutionally wrong with that? No. Anything
evil? Anything diabolical? It's politics.
Well, I'm not sure before. I'm not sure that the Constitution addresses evil.
I wasn't addressing it constitutionally either. I'm more concerned with the response, because everybody was. You remember the howls and the screams 4 years ago, and you're hearing the howls and the screams this year. It feels like everything is just amplified to the point where reason and historical context really doesn't matter. I didn't even go back 4 years ago and check and say, gee, does this ever happen where you've got a split between the executive and the legislative and Congress? And the Senate. Has this ever happened before? I never bothered to go research it because I just assumed it was some sort of, evil plan to maintain power.
Many, many, many times.
I didn't learn that until the last few months.
This is the sloppiness of our government of our constitution and how our country is run. It's just sloppy and it's loud, it's obnoxious, it's messy. But at the end of the day, you hope that what you get is a decent life.
Yeah, I don't like to scapegoat the media too much. I've talked about this a number of times, where we all have the responsibility to maintain our own minds and learn for ourselves and things. But this is one, I think, 4 years ago where the media completely dropped the ball, at least the liberal media. Because I should have known that. As much news as I was watching in 2016, I should have known. It should have been pointed out that, yes, this is really unfortunate for liberals, but it's happened before. I had no idea. That was not part of the media's narrative 4 years ago, to sort of tone things down.
Yeah.
Hit that pressure release valve that this isn't something unprecedented. We're not raping a norm on national TV today.
It's true. And for whatever reason, I did kind of know that. I think maybe I had seen a little bit of coverage of what you're talking about. I kind of caught it in maybe a very short newscast with one of the presidential historians that shows up occasionally. Yeah. So I knew that this isn't something that's unprecedented. And that's been kind of one of the guiding posts that keeps me fairly optimistic, is that a lot of the stuff that we've been going through isn't unprecedented. Most of it isn't, but it's happened before, and we've kind of come through it, and we've come through worse. So I've got this sort of "this too shall pass" kind of mentality. Mm-hmm. Where I think we run into trouble with the current administration, and I don't know if this is off topic or not, is that it's not that he's doing things that are necessarily illegal, whether you can, we won't get into whether we're going to prove stuff or not, but it's just that he if it's not expressly written down that he can't do something, he's like, well, fuck it, I'm going to, stop me. What are you going to do? You know what I mean? Yes. And so, yes. And so I think that's where we're running into problems here. He's just thumbing his nose at the entire mechanism of government. It's like, well, you didn't write down that I can't do this, so fuck you. I'm gonna do it. And that's, as I understand it, that's kind of how he's managed his life.
25 years ago, when I first started to sort of kind of pay attention to politics, I'm like, well, what's stopping people from doing X? There's a whole slew of examples that I can't really think of specifically right now.
You're right.
But I kept thinking to myself, like, okay, well, why don't you just not this, or why don't you just do this? What's stopping you from doing that? And it's just the thought in my head was, well, we just don't do that. Like, it's understood. It's a norm. It's a mean. Is it a mean?
Traditional. It's normative. It's a handshake. It's how we've done things in the country for 250 years. And somebody comes along like this, this president, and says, there's nothing that says I can't do what I want to do. And I don't really give a shit about tradition and decorum and what's the normative way of doing business in Washington. So screw you guys. I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I feel like this began with Bush. I don't think it's just Trump. I think Trump's maybe the latest manifestation of it, or the extreme manifestation of it. Or, well, I would go back to the Tea Party as well. They did a lot of things in the early teens that sort of started to erode some of this. And I've always looked at Trump as just a direct line correlation, straight back to the Tea Party. That's when Trump was sort of, when his sperm crawled up the electoral vaginal canal. And you know what I'm saying. But
Yeah.
I feel like what you were talking about when these erosion of these norms and these things that we just don't do, I feel like that began with George Bush, with Iraq. I think after the war, his connection to his daddy being targeted for assassination, invading a country that had nothing to do with 9/11, the WMD stuff that was exposed. That to me, I don't know. Maybe I was just paying attention for the first time. I guess that's possible.
Yeah, that's kind of when I woke up, honestly. You know what I mean, to that kind of stuff, and just the level of corruption and the intense propaganda, and I was just gobsmacked by it.
Yeah.
But I didn't know how to think about it because I'd never been exposed to that. Even with bad presidents before, there was some level of, I don't know I guess decorum. I don't know. I don't know how to say it. Some level of trust that the traditions of running the country are maintained, going back to Washington and Jefferson, Hamilton,
Yeah.
And all of that is it's like we're playing 52 pickup with all of those morals and methods and ways we do business. And McConnell too, McConnell's great at that shit too, where he's like, well, stop me, figure out a way to stop me.
It feels like a game to him, like he's playing Risk. I don't know. I have that in my head. And it could be, too, that maybe we started to see all of this because I guess around 2000 with George Bush, that first administration, and the internet really became the internet 2.0 in that area, that's
a
realm.
good point.
So maybe we just started to see it.
It's not the first corrupt administration, right? I mean,
sure.
And before, you had to wait, hours for news, and before that, you had to wait days, and before that, it was a month before you got the news of what happened, in Washington this month or last month, and then by then it's too late and it's all done, and who gives a shit? But now, you're getting, real time reporting on what's happening, whether it's factual or not, but it's real time, and it's coming at us so fast. We're just not emotionally equipped.
That's Marshall McLuhan. That's Neil Postman.
Yeah,
a lot of people are talking about data overload. I haven't talked to you a lot about that. I think I mentioned it a few times, but I've got a lot of episodes back in the list there.
That's something I've looked into quite a few times too.
Yeah, as the technology takes off, people don't adapt to it as well as they think they do, and sometimes they don't adapt to it at all. I mean, in 200 years or 150, well, what is this? This is 2020, so let's say 200 years. In the last 200 years, we have gone from information moving at the speed of horse to literally moving at the speed of light.
Yep.
Instantaneous access to information. You're dead on about that. The Pony Express would bring news from the East Coast into town a week after it happened.
That's right.
Right?
And it's all past tense, right? Oh, this happened.
Right.
This happened last week. Oh, this is happening. This is going on now. So then we get some, I guess maybe there's some switch inside our brains that makes us think we can do something about it.
Right.
Since it's happening right now.
250 years ago, it's like Thomas Paine put out Common Sense, and it was a sensation. It's a pure piece of propaganda. Mm-hmm. Common Sense. It's agitation propaganda directed at the British. Okay? Mm-hmm. Yep. It's fine. Yep. But it was such a sensation, and so many people read it. It was like by far, I think, at that point in time, more people read that pamphlet per capita in this country than maybe still have read any other book other than the Bible.
Well, it really struck the emotional chord of everybody, right? Because we were all here because we didn't want to be subject to British rule, and so he really struck all those chords.
Yeah, but in order to have a counter argument to that, somebody had to go to the printing press. They had to write it, they had to take it to the printing press, and then they had to disseminate it.
Oh, they had to lay every letter in, right? They had to put every letter into this little rail, and then what I mean. You had to really want to publish. You had to really want to write something back then.
Yeah, and I can pick my phone up right now, boom, 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 and it's global instantaneously.
Yeah, right.
And that's had a huge effect on everything. People are just confused and not able to sort through and curate all the data and the information.
Yeah, it hasn't been a positive effect either. I think it's been 90% negative.
Yeah, that was McLuhan's argument back in the 60s. A lot of people before him started to tinker with it, but McLuhan, Ellul got into a little bit, but particularly Neil Postman in the 80s. Just before the internet started to come around, he was drilling that point home in Musing Ourselves to Death in Technopoly. It's one of those things where if you get so overwhelmed with information and confusion from both sides, you can't tell what's real, what's fake. It's so easy when you're drowning, as I said in the show last week, to grab onto any piece of driftwood to keep your head above water.
Even if you're self-aware and this is coming and you're fairly mindful of all of this stuff, you can still get caught up in this stuff. I find myself watching something and going, yeah, fuck yeah. And then 10 minutes later, I'm going, oh, wait, that's what they mean.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I do.
And then you have this sort of overwhelming feeling of shame.
Yeah. I made mine public last year.
But it happens all the time because it's disguised. They're figuring out how to counteract our own the agency of our own minds faster than we can figure out how to counteract it.
Yeah, they know us better than we know ourselves.
Fuck yeah, it's astonishing.
Yeah. I have, this was before you had, I think before we reconnected last year, but that happened to me 3 times last year. While I was doing the propaganda material, while I was sitting here railing and raging against agitation propaganda, I got nailed 2 or 3 times with it last year. Myself.
Mm-hmm. They figured out what string to pluck.
Yeah, and it's because...
And I plucked it.
And I figured out, at least for me, why. Because it was because of the stuff that I was in this really anti-socialist phase at that time, like the anti-Green Tea Party. This was about the time the Democratic Socialists, a little convention, talking about being comradely and comrade this and everybody heard that last year.
Yeah.
So I was really particularly interested in that, and that was where my focus was lying with some of these folks from the IDW, the intellectual dark web. Mm-hmm. And they had put a bunch of stuff up, and it was like almost like filling my mind with kerosene, right? And it was like, and then I saw the perfect little propaganda poster / meme on Facebook that acted as the ignition fuse.
Bam.
Yeah, and I'm just like raging. Like I was talking to you yesterday about how I'm Bill from True Blood, and I can't control when my fangs come out sometimes. Oh boy, I was ripping throats out left and right. I was at the bar.
Yeah.
But I caught myself. It took a day or two. But I'm sitting here. Calm down. Okay. Oh shit! Did that just?
Yeah.
Yeah, you son of a bitch.
Yeah.
And this stuff wasn't produced professionally. This was taken, I researched it. I had to go follow the meme because you can do this now on the internet. It takes a little work and a little perseverance, but you can follow where these things come from once they're disproven. I wasn't nailed by some operative. I was nailed by some twat probably living in his parents' basement posting something to 8chan.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And then they figure, the algorithm gets you figured out, and it says, oh, this is the drug he likes. This is this thing that he likes, and then they keep serving it to you until they fucking nail you.
Well, the thing that's more. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. I was going ready to go off the rails. Go ahead.
Now, the thing that got me about that whole thing was that this wasn't engineered. The algorithm in social media, that was the delivery device. That's fine. But the kid or the person, I'm going to assume it's a kid. I have a picture. He's got red hair, freckles, and a patch over his eye.
Hey, that's exactly what I looked like when I was a kid without the patch.
Really? Can't even see. Yeah, I can. I have seen you in your Navy picture before. I guess I can't picture that. But this kid. These people, these, all they want to do is get a rise. They want somebody to share this, somebody within some organization, some quote-unquote reputable organization to share it and actually take it seriously so they can sit there, look what we did. That's pretty much the point of what they do, but they've gotten very, 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 very good at it. And they've taken I don't think they have any concept or clue of what they're doing or how they're doing it, but they've taken these techniques of propaganda and they've figured out how to use them and how to exploit them. They put a little kernel of truth in there. They put like a real sounding organization. I'm thinking of one in particular right now, right? Mm-hmm. And they take something that is based on something real. That's what got me is that the thing, I'm thinking about the one, I'd have to go look at it, and I don't want to give the wrong impression on it, but it was based on feminism. Mm-hmm. And so they had taken a piece of the meme and based that on something I had heard before from actual feminazis, as I like to call them, because I don't like them. That's why I like to call them that. But that I'd heard that before, so that was like, oh, this is real. Yeah, I know where that's coming from. That was the entry device into my head. And they're very, very, they're clever as shit.
Yeah.
They only want to get a rise out of people, okay? They're just doing this to sort of stir the pot and, stoke their own ego and all that. But it's the same method, the same mechanism that's being used by people who are actual operatives in some way, shape, or fashion.
Yeah, perfect. That's exactly right. And they've sort of figured out, they've got the skeleton key that opens up the door to your brain, and you don't have it. And and they know how to unlock that sucker and get in there, and you don't even know they're there until you take a minute. Become self-aware. I like your notion that really the only mitigation against this is just some self-awareness, right? Just realize what's coming at you before you react. And they know that, right? So like you said, there are sometimes just trolls out there just trying to piss you off, and they have fun with that. But there are other people who have figured out how to do that professionally.
Yeah.
And turn it into a weapon. And you don't know it's coming. Yeah. You just don't know.
Yeah, and I think I've had this, one of the ideas I had in the shower yesterday, we were talking about, I wish I could remember everything coming out of the shower. I really do.
Yeah, you almost need to record it, right? You almost need to record a conversation.
Yeah, pretty much just like vocal notes. Somebody should invent that. Something you can hang in the shower head that'll record your shower thoughts, and then you can get it when you come out.
You always get great ideas when you're in the shower.
Yeah, and one of the ones I was thinking about yesterday had to do with the Manchurian Propagandists thing. That I don't think that the kid at 4chan or 8chan, whatever, I forget, one of the chans, he didn't understand what he was doing, but he had been paying attention. He had been seeing it over and over and over again, and he figured out, I think, just instinctively or intuitively, the psychological mechanisms at play and how they worked. I think as a culture and a society, I think millions and millions and millions of us have done the exact same thing. We don't realize it. We don't understand what we're seeing. We just understand how it makes us feel. We like how it makes us feel, so we want to use that to our in-group. We also see how somebody supposedly is owning someone else. And we want to do that to our enemies and our, opponents. So we take these little elements of these things that we see and learn how to construct absent-mindedly, completely oblivious and devoid of the consequences or the psychological manipulations at play and become Manchurian propagandists. I think, and I honestly believe that has taken over, or I'm coming to believe, I should say, that's taking over the entire informational ecosystem.
I don't have an argument against that. I think you're right. I really do. Because there is no argument against that. The proof is everywhere you turn, right?
Yeah.
Everywhere.
If that's the case, I mean,
I got a little more, I want to say anxious. Anxiety and fear are basically two sides of the same coin, but I want to say I got a little anxious over this militia thing.
Yeah.
And these people who are when you talking about, intentionally trying to start a civil war. Yeah. You mentioned fear, and that's the first thing that came to my mind is, lately I'm a little more afraid than I usually am. You know me, I tend to try to believe the best outcomes of things. I tend to believe that, as a society, we tend to do the right thing in the long run, even though we stumble sometimes. In this case, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I think traditionally we have, but the X factor. It's the Matrix. It's the dueling informational universe, war of the virtual worlds, the thing we talked about a few weeks ago, and this ability to isolate ourselves off in these parallel universes. And as I said just a minute ago, the Manchurian Propagandist thing, where we just are waging war with bullshit information. There's no tethering to reality or fact at all. That's the X factor. This is new to the human experience. The level of this and how it's saturating every aspect of society.
That is what makes it different. You're absolutely right.
So we have no idea. We are. You can be optimistic, and I would be too if things were the same as they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. I would be, we're not going to elect. I thought that in 2016. We're not going to elect this guy. We do the right thing. Yeah, okay, there's a George Wallace every now and then, but he usually doesn't win. He never wins a big election like this. And I woke up across from, Cheyenne Mountain the next morning just like, what the fuck happened?
I think everybody woke up like that, right?
That's why we have not been able to factor in the true effect, both psychologically and socially, of this medium, this technology, and what it's doing to our ability to comprehend the fucking world.
No, you're absolutely right. And I know there's a lot more conversation about it. And I don't know if it's more conversation lately or if it's just since you and I have started talking about it on this podcast, maybe I'm just noticing it more. But I've noticed that there are more conversations about, congressional hearings, more people testifying. What is the damage being done? A lot of this stuff is kind of front and center. Maybe not on the A section of the newspaper, but at least maybe in the B section of the newspaper. And there's a lot going on in Congress about it too. So I'm hoping that something comes out of that, some kind of change. I don't know that these companies are going to get broken up. I think something came out last week that said that was not a recommendation by the committee to break up the companies. But there needs to be there's some way to tap the brakes on this information, but I don't think anybody knows how to do that. Mainly because of our obsession with, free speech porn and, all this kind of stuff where, my freedom to say whatever I want trumps, no pun intended, trumps any semblance of fact that comes out of my mouth, right? Yeah. But wait a minute. There are some laws against sort of intentionally getting people riled up. What is that called? We have to look that up. We have to find that. Maybe one of your listeners knows this. There are laws against getting people intentionally
provocation laws. Is that what you're talking about? Like provocation?
Provocation.
Inciting a riot.
That kind of stuff. Yeah. And I wonder if that could apply.
Yeah, there's something that you just said that Walter Lippmann, I don't have the book here and I don't know where to find the quote. I wish I did because it's absolutely perfect. I have used it on the show before, where he was talking, he became sort of an anti-democrat. He started out as a socialist, and later through his, middle-age years, he sort of became, like a lot of people, the guy that I was talking about a couple of weeks ago, Dan Carlin, he's a we the people guy, and now he's not quite so sure. I don't know if the people can really decide what's best for the people. Okay, maybe not. And I went through this myself. Well, Lippmann went through the same thing, and he began to talk about free speech. And one of the things that he came up with was, God, it's so brilliant. I wish I had it sitting here in front of me. But when the right to bleach your holy opinion, say anything you want, becomes so devoid of truth or tethering to fact, that it just becomes irrelevant and chaff in the grill, the mill, or what he said it so much better than I did. I wish I had it here in front of me.
No, but you're making sense though. It makes sense to me. You're probably right, but at some point there's got to be a way to pump the brakes on this shit.
Without shutting it all down, without shutting social media down, without taking the ability to broadcast your latest intellectual fart into everyone's home around the globe instantaneously. That's the thing, instantaneously, at your every whim, be able to say anything you want to anyone you want, no matter where they're at, no matter whether or not they want to hear it or not. Without being able to do that, I don't know how you pump the brakes on it, because this shit is addicting.
I think there are times when the laws can apply that it's where it's not being applied. Like I'm talking about, there are laws against inciting riots, and so yelling fire in a crowded theater. That's again that kind of shit. Sure. And it applies to this kind of stuff too, probably vaguely, if somebody ever wanted to actually apply the law to these organizations. But the idea that the free speech itself is more valuable than the preservation of free speech is more valuable than disallowing garbage to be sent out and broadcast and spoken is probably right. So then it comes back to really what you've been saying, and that is it's personal responsibility. Yeah. Right.
Well, that's what Lippmann said.
It's personal responsibility. You need to take the time to become educated on the facts, but then you got to trust that people will. Right. And if they don't, then you end up where we are right now.
Yeah. And I have almost completely lost that trust. I mean, I was having this conversation with Chris yesterday, and it was triggered in something you said a couple of weeks ago, the last time you were on, really got me to thinking about this because of the divisiveness conversation, the exchange we had about that, and tribalism. Like, are we talking out of both sides of our mouth when we're talking about being tribal or decrying tribalism while being divisive and being tribal? Right?
Yes.
I had to really think about that because you're half right. And I addressed that in the podcast last week, I think, really well. But where's the tribe here? Where is my tribe? I want to meet my tribesmen. If I am being tribal, where are they? See,
that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I have two people that I talk to on a regular basis about this in person, physically talk to, and it's you and Chris. I talk to the girlfriend about it every now and then as well, but she, you know her, so.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
She does what she can.
She's got a low tolerance for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, right. Yeah, she doesn't like to swim in feces like I do, apparently. She's normal.
but she's also very self-aware, and she understands the topics, and she gets educated on the issues and stuff like that. Yeah. So
I kind of went off the rails. Let me finish up my point there. The point about the tribalism was that I have such a low trust level for people to actually want to do this, to want to search out the truth, detach from, get their dog out of the fight, leave the congregation and examine, the religious landscape with their own two eyes. And that's why I don't have a group, because it would seem like you can't avoid tribalism. Tribalism is ingrained into us. It's part of who we are. That's one mistake that I think I've made, is that you can't eliminate it. But how do you create a tribe of people who are independent thinkers who do not subscribe to one side or the other, one religion or another? How do you do that?
Well, I think you're doing it, right? You have a podcast, and you have, not very active, but you have a Facebook page where you have some people on there able to comment. You do have a small tribe that I think understands this stuff, and I think it just becomes a matter of folks who understand these things going out and talking to other people. I've mentioned people. I wouldn't say we're in the same tribe, but they do seem to understand what I'm talking about when I mention how social media is really, almost, without being hyperbolic, really the destruction of our society.
Yeah.
And they get it, and your listeners get it. So I would say you do have a bit of a tribe.
Yeah.
Those small, and it's becoming more vocal, right? Because you've got that documentary that just came out last month, and The Social Dilemma, right? So that's out there, and millions of people are watching this documentary. There's probably a seed planted in there, and that might be enough of a seed that creates a bit of a gatekeeper to information. That's really what you're hoping for, right? Is people start really filtering information to get better information, to get the good stuff.
Yeah, but then there's another problem with that though as well. So where do you get it?
Well, I've had good luck with my hometown newspaper. It's a good newspaper. It's been around for 190 years, I think, and the reporting is good and it's solid. And you have these organizations out there that do good, solid reporting, and other people will agree. The idea, I guess, maybe that's the first lesson, right? Is how do you figure out who's giving you bullshit and who's giving you news? I wonder, though, if sometimes the fact that oftentimes it's hard to understand the news, and I wonder if that's the problem, is we've become so undereducated in the workings of the government and the world that we almost depend on somebody to translate the news for us, and there's the beginning. That's the problem. Right?
There's a section in Lewell's book, Propaganda, that scares me. I haven't gotten to this part yet. There's two sections, actually. One is Propaganda and Truth. He has a section I've read it. I haven't addressed it yet, but it's how propaganda affects the ability to perceive the truth. Obviously, hugely important. Another one is propaganda and information. And his insight into that was that propaganda and information are almost indistinguishable.
Yeah.
That's terrifying.
It's absolutely true, because oftentimes I just know from, working in the business, oftentimes I'll write a press release, which I know it's factual, but I might choose adverbs that are a little hyperbolic. I might choose adjectives that are a little more descriptive and maybe a little bigger, make things a little bit bigger than what they are. Yeah. And I've seen that press release get published verbatim in a news organization, and it's pure PR. Yeah. Right. There might be one paragraph of useful information in there, but the rest of it's pure PR, and that's what I do.
Yeah, it's editorializing. That's the equivalent, I think, of Brooke Baldwin on CNN. You notice you don't watch CNN. Yeah. She has not been on that station in a few weeks. She got removed, and I've been ripping.
Why?
I have no idea. Nobody said.
No, I actually have her on. I have a CNN all day in my office. I haven't muted up on the wall, but
I've been ripping her an asshole for 2 years because she's one of the worst. She doesn't come out and fully vocally editorialize like Don Lemon or Chris Cuomo at night, but her facial expressions and the way she sighs, her tone, her inflection. It reminds me of what you were saying about using the adjective, using the adjective of choice to imply an opinion, to editorialize in one-word form, right? She does. That's almost the exact equivalent of Brooke Baldwin sitting there with a scowl on her face like somebody farted at the desk.
No, you're absolutely right, and I know exactly who you're talking about, and real journalists understand that. Yeah. Real journalists who have been trained, have live by an ethical code, they're still out there, and all the way down to the adverb and adjective level, they understand that they have to be careful with it. I know that because I have journalism training. I didn't become a journalist, but I was trained that way. And I remember learning about, now be careful with this adjective because it changes the meaning of what you're really trying to say. You don't want this descriptive here because while accurate, it can mean something else that maybe you don't want to go there. So what happens though is when people aren't trained and when they're not subjected to any kind of ethical, when they haven't earned the right to use the knowledge, then they're not disciplined. And without the discipline in writing, you end up with what we have now. We end up with people going to Facebook for their news.
But you've got people who are in the organizations that have maybe abandoned that. Maybe it's become trendy or acceptable to abandon that sort of ethical training. What you're talking about is journalistic ethics here.
Journalistic integrity and ethics. Yeah. But also it has to do with who's signing their paychecks too.
Exactly.
You work for a company like Sinclair, which is pretty much, whatever they need to do to communicate with your people, that's fine. But what they're doing isn't news. Yeah. It's all painted. It's all colored. And that's the corporate, right? So you may have genuine journalists working there, but they have mortgages to pay and families to feed. And they're not going to step outside, and then they get corrupted by the corporation.
And this, I can't really blame Brooke Baldwin here.
I get really passionate about this journalist argument.
No,
that's my passion.
Well, that's good because we have we have some symbiosis there because it is mine as well, because the journalist is the link between the free press and the people. Mm-hmm. I mean, they are the ones that are the intermediary. This is how it's delivered, is through the journalist. And if the journalist doesn't have that training or isn't adhering to it, right, then you've got a serious problem. And you can't really. You can blame Brooke Baldwin to a point, but she's an easy target because her face is out there. It's the person behind her, the person that put her in that position and left her in that position, who's to blame. They're responsible and accountable for the product on their network. And if that product is designed to provoke a reaction more than it is to inform the public because of economics, then that's that in and of itself. I mean, if you want to get directly to the core of the problem, that's it right there. They've chosen the dollar sign over their responsibility inside of a democracy.
They need to pluck the emotional string to get you to come back.
Right, and that's
watch more.
Yeah, and then again, we can go. Then we have to take it a little bit further. Okay, well then, who's really to blame here? Is it then? This is where I've always been. It's the people, because that's what we want. They have to give it to us. Because if they don't give us what we want, there's a billion choices for information out there. We'll go someplace that's friendly, that tastes good, and they will be out of business.
And their ratings drop, and their advertising revenue drops, and pretty soon they go away. So
it's us.
It's us. Yeah, it's us. It always comes back to individuals.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And individuals need to make better choices. I'm just going to leave it at that. We need to make better choices as human beings in just about everything we do.
Well, particularly this, for the context of this podcast and the material that we're covering. This is everything.
It really is.
I am terrified. We should probably move on to that militia thing because. And the kidnapping plot, we're both in Michigan. You're on the east side. I'm on the west side. Lansing's right in the middle. Mm-hmm. And these militia members were all over the state. I think there were a few on your side. We had one who was in Blainwell, right up the road, right up by Allegan. If you've forgotten where that's at. The ringleader was, I think he lived in Grand Rapids in the basement of a vacuum cleaner shop. You talk about Breaking Bad. That's what I thought of.
Well, that fits. It fits the mold. What we're talking about for these type of folks. I'm not saying I don't want to cast them all with the same brush, but there is a certain characterization of the individuals that get involved in these organizations, and that fits.
What would you think it would be? The characteristics, the general characteristics as you understand them, the ones that you can identify as, how would you?
Wow, that's a really deep conversation, especially when you get into the psychological aspects of it and stuff like that. But, there are certain similarities, right? Young to middle-aged white guys, disenfranchised, futures are precarious, they're naturally paranoid, they have obsessions, or they have this weird comfort with weapons that most people probably don't have, and they tend to be a little bit extreme on they might be racist, they might be sexist, all of these things. They might be those things because they see the world as having wronged them, right, in some way. So there's a whole lot going on there, and a lot of it has to do with low tolerance for frustration. It's a common psychological factor, and also this sort of demandingness that life needs to be fair, right? They believe that everything about life needs to be fair, and it must be fair, and it has to be fair, and nothing wrong can happen to me. Then they start spinning themselves, I think, out of control. And then the right person comes along on the right website or the right social media account who agrees with them, and then soon there's a little tribe forming, and pretty soon you've got all these guys spinning in their own shit. Yeah. And then they've got to take it out somewhere. And that what I just gave you was a real rudimentary look at what this is and what these folks look at. Mm-hmm. But generally speaking, that they tend to be a little undereducated. Not that I don't mean that as offensively to folks who aren't highly educated. I'm just saying that these folks generally have less than high school oftentimes, and it's easy for them to get sort of indoctrinated into these beliefs because they see a tribe that they can identify with, because the world around them it's becoming foreign to them, right? Uh-huh. And it's not the world that they thought that they lived in. And things are happening so quickly with all of the various movements and all of the things that people are standing up against. It becomes too much for them. From a super basic kind of psychological understanding, that's kind of what you're dealing with here.
Some of those things, I when you were listening,
go ahead. And I just want to say fundamental. What am I want to say? Fundamental Christian fundamentalism. That plays a pretty big part in it too. This dogmatic belief in what's right and what's wrong, and this is what we talked about, I think, 2 weeks ago. And you put it a lot better than I did, where you have this view, and it has to be the world view because it's my view. Yep. What is that called? It's like a mandatory belief. You said it.
Well, I thought you were going to go down the moral imperative line.
That's it. That was it. Yes. Yeah. Yes. That's it. Too.
A lot of these traits, it sounds like, not all of them. A lot of them are specific to the militia movement, I think. But a lot of these traits, when you're reading these off, I'm not thinking of the militia movement. I'm thinking of the woke flakes. I'm thinking of the people at the DSA convention screaming "Comrade" last year.
You have to find what the key difference is, but right, there are a lot of similarities. And maybe the key difference is fear, right? We know that research has shown that people who tend to be more conservative are driven by fear, right? And people who tend to be more liberal are more driven by hope, right? Hope and potential. Idealism, right? And those two things are very different, and they create a very different beast. You know what I'm saying? Though they can be just as loud and obnoxious, though the one side is less apt to kill you than the other side.
Are they?
I would say so.
My mind is going about 15 different directions, and I'm trying to figure out if I want to walk that line. I don't think I want to walk that plank today, because I disagree with that. I think that in the beginning, maybe I don't agree with that. I don't think that militia groups, that the far-right militia groups, at their core, taking a wide view historical context, I don't think they are less likely or more likely to kill you than left-wing radicals are.
You're probably right. I think when I create this summary, what I'm talking about are the extreme groups.
Yeah.
Realize most militia groups by far are not violent against other people. They're not planning to overthrow any, but they're not planning civil wars. They're a bunch of guys who go out in the woods and shoot their guns at targets. And just in case there might be a need to defend the state, they're there. And that's kind of their mindset. A lot of preppers, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Fine. Yeah. If that's your thing, fine, go for it. What I'm talking about are the extreme of the extreme. Mm-hmm. And then you're right. The extreme of the extreme on both sides, I think, can be pretty violent.
The militia movement is isolated, and it's an American phenomenon. It's within these borders. You don't hear about, well, maybe you do. I haven't heard of too many Swiss militias, right? I just haven't.
Yeah.
Whereas far left extremism is an international thing. I mean, we've seen how these extreme socialist movements, these communist movements, what's happened in Cuba. We can get my friend Joe. His parents were refugees from Cuba a few decades ago, escaping Castro. We can get him on the phone to talk about how that movement affected Cuba. How many people were killed by Che Guevara and people in Cuba because they didn't toe the ideological line? How many people were thrown in gulags? How many people died of Well, I don't want to bring the starvation comment into it, but how many people in China under Mao were killed because they didn't toe the ideological line?
You're right. No, you're right. Absolutely, you're right.
Yeah, I kind of twitched a little bit at that, and the other thing was this need for fairness and what I guess is justice.
That's a common ailment that a lot of people have. I used to see when I used to be a practicing therapist. A lot of people bring that into therapy, and it's one of the great problems that people have. But this is just a problem that's also common to these kind of guys. Right?
Yeah, my mind shot immediately to the left because we're hearing all the chants right now about no justice, no peace. Well, what is justice? Justice is fairness. The intolerance of frustration because we live in an imperfect society. And society hasn't reached utopia in 200 years. We're impatient. We need this to happen now. We need our idealism to be realized, and we need it. We want it. We demand it now.
Yeah.
That's what I thought of. You were applying this to the right-wing guys, but that's exactly what I was thinking to myself. And I think these traits, and I'm not trying to put more blame on the left than on the right. We were having a conversation about the extremists and the kidnapping plot here, but I think these traits... This is why I think these groups, these far right groups and these far left groups are flip sides of the same fucking coin.
Mm-hmm.
They just worship a different God. It's like being in the Middle East and being an Arab or being a Jew. It doesn't matter. The conflict is there. It doesn't really matter what side you've mustered up with.
Yeah.
the conflict is there. The bombs are going off. People are getting shot. Mm-hmm. Either way. And we talked yesterday about the need for, and I don't know how to generate this, but there has to be a pressure release valve hit at some point where we can just and bring the temperature down.
Yeah, that's going to take people like us in the middle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I tend to be a little bit middle left. I think you tend to be just a little bit more straight up in the middle, at least the way it sounds to me right now.
Depends on the issue.
But. Yeah, it depends on the issue. Whereas I tend to be a little bit more conservative when it comes to defense and things like that. But I'm generally a little left on a lot of things. But you're absolutely right. You can kind of pick and choose and fit a lot of these things into the puzzle on both sides.
Yeah.
And it's radicalization. And it's the same no matter where you are, right? So if you take the same kind of principles, you could pretty much take the way these 13 guys came together and change some of the words, and it looks like it came straight out of a Middle Eastern country who's radicalized. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of difference there. People are people no matter where you go, and the psychological factors involved in creating radicalization are the same no matter where you go. Once it becomes your, I guess, religion, whether it is religion or whether it's just a belief, but once it becomes similar to religious belief, like you call it, a moral imperative, that's, I think, is when it gets dangerous.
When it becomes self-righteousness, and that's when this Diddy and putting you under the field of the madman.
Yeah.
The totalitarian, the authoritarian, the dictator.
Yeah. That's when it gets to, well, I have to punish people who don't believe the way I do.
Right. You have to save them or you have to crucify them.
Or you have to kill them.
Yeah.
But you can't have both.
Right.
And then that goes back to forever.
Right. Well,
these are the Crusades. And,
it's part of human nature, man.
Yeah.
It's what we do. That's what we did when I mentioned this before. We hit Latin America. We hit the east coast of the United States. There were Indians here. Oh, shit. Well, we're going to take care of that. They're savages. They're not really people. They don't worship Jesus Christ. So
gotta go.
Just us, man. I was going to talk about the militia guys because I wouldn't say I know a lot of these folks, but I grew up in the sweaty redneck groin of Michigan down around Indiana, Ohio. There's no interstate down there. This is Trump country, very conservative, very racist in the literal sense. And I know a lot of folks who are, I don't know if they are members of the militia. I tried to find out a little bit more about this a few months ago. And because the material that I've been talking about, I've been predicting something like this with Whitmer for a long time. Assassinations, all of that stuff. And this is just, in my view, the tip of the iceberg. You see this one event, these 13 people here in this state, and what's riding beneath the surface, what's bobbing down there in the sea, in the murky black sea that you haven't seen yet, would astound you.
Yeah, do you think this is the Boston Tea Party, basically? And
I don't know. I couldn't quite get a fix on it because they're very secretive. They didn't want to talk to me. They don't trust me.
Which is really, it's kind of strange to me because they feel like that they're guaranteed by the Second Amendment to have this, right? You shall have, a well-formed militia and that sort of thing. They really honestly believe that it's within their right to be in a militia. Why the secretiveness?
Yeah.
Why does it have to be secret if it's your right?
Well, then we're going to start talking about conspiracy theories. We're going to start talking a lot of different.
Yeah, I just don't understand it.
And two, look what happened this week. Look how they were brought down.
Yeah.
FBI.
Yeah.
So the fewer people they talk to about it, the less risk there is of being, infiltrated. But if you're worried about being infiltrated, what are you doing?
Well, and the group was formed on social media, right? Through Facebook accounts. One of the dudes is posting videos with his radical shit, and then they use like this encryption and stuff like that. So it's all happening over social media and web and email and all that kind of stuff in the basement of a hardware store under a trap door.
Well, they're getting together. They got together in person on the east side of the state. They met up in Ohio. So it's not just social media.
Not the first time this has happened to a Michigan governor, by the way.
It's not.
No, there was one. I think the governor before Mitt Romney's dad. I forget, George Romney. I think
so.
The one before him. I can't remember his name. I'm sorry. It was actually in the Free Press this morning. That's why I know it. I don't walk around with this knowledge. But anyway, he was visiting. He had some kind of visit to a prison, one of the big prisons in Michigan, and he was taken and held at knife point by some prisoners there.
It just seems like okay, the governor's here. Let's take him. We can get out, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's different. It's different. It's not like they were planning on civil
Yeah.
war or anything. They were probably just wanting to get better rights, or let's take the governor. Maybe we can get out of here or something. But the point is, it's not the first time bad things happen. And these things do come up.
This state is a hotbed for this activity. Have you heard of hootery? They mentioned it in one of the newscasts the other day.
Hootery.
Yeah.
Hootery.
Hutaree. That's a group that was down in Lenawee County, which is Adrian, down in the southern part of the state, sort of between Jackson and Detroit, down south. Yeah. And they were plotting to shoot police officers, kill police officers, and then bomb the funerals.
What?
Yeah.
Who fucking thinks of that? I mean, Jesus.
They were, the plot, just like this one, was broken up. Some of these
to
guys.
What end? I mean, what did they want?
The same thing. I think it's the same thing. I think it's to start some sort of civil unrest, civil war, because they see, and I got to admit, I'm sort of conflicted in my opinion of these guys. Mm-hmm. I understand a bit where they're coming from. Just a bit. I mean, I'm not saying I think Gretchen, I supported what she did with the lockdowns. Our state has rebounded from what was happening in this state. In Michigan back in March and April has rebounded nicely. I joined a gym the other day.
Good for you.
So I don't have to worry about going out and, contracting this virus in this state. As long as I stay out of your part of the state, I'm reasonably safe. She did a good job, I think, with that. Well, they think that she is, the second coming of Hitler. Right? Yeah. The conspiracy, this is just a primer to take your rights away next, whatever. Yeah. Yeah, right. I don't have any sympathy for that kind of thinking whatsoever, but I do understand where they're coming from as far as the culture war stuff, as far as the leftist infiltration of the country. I understand where they're coming from with that. Now, do I 100% agree with it? I agree with some of it, not all of it. I understand the mindset. I don't understand completely what they're doing in reaction to it. And to be perfectly honest with you, as far as the Second Amendment goes, if the country goes to shit in the next 6 months, I want to be able to go to the gun store up the street and get myself a gun.
They're sold out. Right?
I don't know. I haven't looked.
Yeah, it's been difficult from what I've heard. If you can get a weapon, you can't get ammo.
Yeah.
Right. But these guys, another thought that I had, with the type of people these are on both sides, right? And I'm sure you can think of some examples, but most of the time, the people in militias or, which tend to be more conservative, or the people who are on the extreme left, these are people who have trouble fitting in anywhere else, right? They're just kind of getting through. They're just it's people who just can't seem to fit in no matter what group comes along, and so what they see in these groups is a sense of a belonging, right? Oftentimes, and I've read this, only a handful of the people that are in these groups actually have any genuine commitment to their cause. They're members because they've been alienated by society, and they need to find people that they can identify with, right? Other alienated people, and so. Once you really get into the heads of some of these guys, you figure out that they really don't even believe any of this shit that they're spilling. They just want to get approval from the guy that's in charge of the group or whatever, right?
Yeah, it reminds me of the propaganda stuff.
Yeah, it really is. It's just not. I don't know. They take vulnerable, generally young men, and just like anywhere else, right? And they bring them into this indoctrination when they're very easily influenced, and it's criminal. It's criminal what they're doing to these guys' minds.
I don't know. I'm thinking of the people that I do know, both on the left and on the right, who have become susceptible to this, the real extremism. And I would agree with you in a lot of cases, but not all of them. I mean, some of the people that I know are very well adjusted. They have a lot of friends. They have a big social group. They always have had a big social group, and they're just as passionately indoctrinated as somebody who might be a fringe critter that needed a place to hang out, place to get in from the cold.
Yeah, any port, right?
Yeah, and if you're looking at it as a religion, if you're putting it through that, taking it through that lens and that prism, which I love to do, I mean, hey, you can go into any church. I mean, the people who are members of any congregation in any church anywhere, not all of them are outcasts. These are pillars of the community, people who belong, but maybe they're getting their sense of belonging or their identity, their social identity from, I don't know. But it
could be, or maybe they're the pillars of society, but they see their society changing so rapidly they don't know how to process it. And somebody comes along and says, "Hey, here's my group. We believe the same."
Yeah,
it's cultism.
I don't know. I can empathize with, or at least understand. I don't know if I can fully empathize, but I can understand the anger about how society is changing. I can understand where that's coming from. And I'm not really ready to have this conversation with you per se. Not yet. I need to get my facts straight and get my head straight around it. But, I've come to see the far left movement as sort of an insurgency. That's the agitation propaganda angle. Agitation propaganda is the propaganda of insurgency. It's meant to destabilize whatever's there. And the reason I say this is because the American myth, the American religion, the cohesive narrative, all myths are bullshit to some degree, to some extent, right? All men are created equal. Yeah, well, women, you don't vote, and those black guys over there, they're 2/3. Okay, so it's bullshit. Yeah. There's a disconnect there, right? But the foundational myth, the thing that has made this country what it is, that created the American tribe, right? That was united, at least to some degree, together, was founded upon individualism and freedom. Mm-hmm. Collectivism and individualism are mutually exclusive. They are oil and water. They are black and white. Socialism has been trying to get a foothold in this country for 100 years.
It's already got a pretty. Think
extreme
about
extreme socialism.
Okay.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, you're right. And one of the reasons that communism didn't do better in the 1930s was Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his New Deal reforms, giving the socialists, giving the leftists something so that they could say, okay, well, we got this. I guess we don't really need to take over the entire fucking country.
Yeah.
Sort of taking things down a little bit, offering a little compromise. But socialism, the far left, has not been able to really take over the fabric of the country. The religion hasn't been able to come ashore in its boat, come in, tear down the idols, tear down the church, and pronounce the new religion of collectivism.
Yeah. No. Wow.
But it's trying. I've made the connection between, I find the colonialism's all over the far left zeitgeist these days. You're a colonist. You're an imperialist.
Right.
And what I see is collectivism is not native to this country. It isn't. Our foundational myth, as I said, is based on individualism, the antithesis of collectivism, self-determination. You're your own man. All right.
Yeah.
And socialism and collectivism. I shouldn't say socialism. I think when I say socialism, a lot of people think that I'm talking about social economics, like the economic issues. That's not what I'm talking about.
Right. I'm
talking about the culture war shit and this idea of the collectivist utopia and the noble savage. See, this is why I wanted to get my shit together before, because there's a lot of different areas where this comes together. The point that I'm trying to make is that I've come to see this as almost like a religious war, like Cortez landing on the beach, trying to establish Catholicism in this new world. Mm-hmm. First, he has to depose what's there. And I'm seeing this connection between tearing down George Washington statues, calling Thomas Jefferson a racist, canceling everything about American history. What this boils down to is tearing down the idols, tearing down the old idols, tearing down the barbarian idols after you've come ashore so you can prop up your own, so you can eventually tear the temples down to erect yours. You have to change the narrative. You have to change the national religion. And when bringing it back to what we were talking about before with these militia groups, I don't think what they're seeing is 100% paranoia. 80% maybe. It's not all paranoia. They are detecting something that's there and responding to it. They are defending what they see as their faith.
Yeah, it's moral absolutism, right? And they feel like they need to defend it. But then again, it depends on who you talk to. Is it time for us to look at some of these idols and say, Maybe, I mean, yes, there's history there, but do they need to be in the town square? Is it time for us to look at some of the ways we've done business for the last 200 years socially and say, yeah, maybe it's time for us to reinvent ourselves a little bit? So it's like you said, it's not entirely paranoia, but it's also a changing society that they're just not ready for.
Sure.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have the, God, I want to say capacity, but I don't mean that, because I don't think these guys are stupid by any sense. I'm not implying that.
No, they're not.
I'm just saying that they just don't have the flexibility of mind, right? To look at something that's coming, look at something that's new, and wonder if it might be better
for who?
Afterwards.
For who?
I don't know.
Well, let's talk about self-interest. I mean, we're trying to be realistic as far as human nature, okay? And we are typically driven by our own self-interest. Typically, yeah, sure.
So yeah, I mean, that's really what. Yeah, I mean, if even when we talk on a societal level, it's our self-interest that's driving that.
Right. So why would they, if they are in a position of privilege, as we're constantly being told, we're middle-aged white men and their white privilege, their unfair privilege. If that's true, how is it rational in any way, shape, or fashion to want to give that up? Why would you subjugate yourself? Why would you lower yourself willingly to a point where you're subjugated to someone else when you're already where you probably want to be?
Yeah, right. No, it goes against every aspect of what makes sense to a human being. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then there's some. But then you have to look at the suffering of other people. Right?
Abstract
you have to be able to
concepts
look at that.
of fairness and justice.
Yeah, and then you have to look at that and go, well, is there a way that I can help? Right. If you're inclined to that sort of thing.
Right.
Is there a way that I can help? Is there something that maybe I'm doing that is contributing to that suffering?
Are you morally obligated? Is it a moral imperative that you do that?
I don't know. I don't know if it's an imperative or if it's just if it's something that you believe is right. Does that make it a moral imperative individually? Do I have like me? Do I have a moral imperative to donate money to organizations that I think are helpful?
A moral imperative to apply to yourself, though. That's not really what we're talking about. What we're talking about when we say moral imperatives is that you must do this because I believe it's correct. You donating to a nonprofit or something, you're not demanding that I do it.
Well, no, yeah, no, of course not. Yeah, so you're kind of talking basically about our tax system, right? Right. So you get into then we can get into a conversation about Social Security tax, right? Payroll tax. Is it a moral imperative for us to take care of our older citizens? And in so doing, let's impose this tax where everybody has to contribute. Let's not
go that direction just yet, because is it a moral imperative? Are these folks morally obligated to examine their position on the social totem pole, examine the position of some other group who certainly has been oppressed, persecuted, however you want to look at it? Is it a moral imperative that each and every white person in this country, white male particularly, look at that position and say, geez, I need to help change my position of privilege?
I think it depends on who you ask. I mean, I don't necessarily believe that. I'm still a bit of an individualist, but if someone is causing harm, blatantly causing harm, then yeah, there's a moral imperative to change that, and it's obvious, right? I don't know the answer to that, because then you're getting into mandatory. Mandating behavior, right? And then
that's where this whole philosophy about socialism that I'm going to get to with you, and I'll probably get to it with Chris at some point as well. It's not really all that conflicting, but that's where it ends. Because what you're talking about is you have to embrace the noble savage. You have to embrace the blank slate theory that people are inherently good and it's all society's fault that we behave this way, and if we could just change society, the noble savage will thrive. Fuck you. No, no, that will not happen. And without that, by abandoning the concept of human nature and what it is, without looking at it, utopia crumbles. Utopia, the whole idea of the utopian society crumbles at its foundation.
Yeah, it sure does.
And
that's the only outcome, right? That's the only possible outcome.
Heaven doesn't exist. Heaven and utopia. Utopia is the atheist heaven. It's heaven on earth. It's the thing you're striving for, but without that pathway via the noble savage and the blank slate, you can't get there. It's a mirage. So, and we've seen this around the globe, whenever communism, extreme far leftism has taken root somewhere else, you have to prop up the facade of the perfect utopian society or on the path to utopia, and the only way you can do that is totalitarian authoritarianism, dictatorship.
Yeah.
It's the only way you can project the illusion to your people that you're really on the path to heaven.
Interesting.
You saying that facetiously or like?
No. That's really interesting. That whole line of thinking is really interesting because it really is. If you go down that path, the only outcome is the disillusionment of utopia or society in general.
We've
right?
seen it repeatedly. It's happened.
Yeah.
It's happened. Gulags. You know, how many people were assassinated? Che Guevara. You know, he used to be one of my heroes. Believe it or not, I watched the movie Motorcycle Diaries. I read his book. When I discovered what happened to him, he was an idealist. He cared about people very, very deeply, the poor people. He wanted social justice. He wanted economic justice so bad. But something happened to him on the road. And when he discovered, I think, communism, when he really got into it, when it first entered into his DNA, and that idealism, that concern, that love for people turned into a moral imperative. That everybody must come along this way, and if you're not with me, you're against me, you're part of the bourgeois enemy, you should die because you are not pulling along toward utopia.
Oh, at that point, you just become a cult leader, right?
But what is it?
You're just a basic run-of-the-mill cult leader at that point.
Right.
When here, drink the Kool-Aid.
But if socialism is the quest for utopia, if it's the quest for the emergence of the noble savage once again, and none of those things exist, how else can you classify socialism? I'm talking about the extreme. I'm not talking about socialist economic policies here. I'm talking about the ideology of it. Yeah. How else can you classify it other than a religion or a cult?
You can't. No, that's what it is, right?
Right. So, to bring it home.
Preaching to the choir a little bit.
To bring it home, when we were talking about the militia groups and what they're preparing for, are they really delusional?
Interesting. I don't know that they're delusional. That's when you in my world, when you use words like that, they have very specific meanings.
Okay, sorry.
You know,
let's use a better one.
No, it's okay. It's just I'm not sure that they're necessarily delusional, but are they caught up in a belief system that is taking advantage of their psychological vulnerabilities? Probably.
Most of these far right groups, most of these far right groups, they will talk, when the very first thing you ask them why they're doing this, they're not going to talk about God and Jesus. They're going to talk about AOC, the Green New Deal. They're going to talk about communism. They're going to talk about creeping socialism, the culture wars, and the attacks on the American way of life and the American system, right? Are they delusional about that? Are they making this up? Are they seeing something that's not there?
Well, just because their beliefs are or are not in accordance with the beliefs of the mainstream does not mean that they're deluded or delusional. It just means that they're not crazy. Are they misguided? Probably.
I honestly have to question that. To a point, maybe they are, but I see a lot of the same things that they rant about. I think they're there. I think this is
sure.
I think
they just take it to the extreme, right? They just take it to the next level.
They want to do something about it. they want to do something extra political about it.
Yeah, exactly. Something outside of the system. Now, and that makes them criminals. Are all criminals delusional? I don't think so. Yeah, in fact, these guys are, by and large, I think all 13 of them are criminals. They've all got police records. So
now let's be clear. Let's be clear. I'm not talking about the 13. I'm talking about the run-of-the-mill, rank-and-file militia guys that aren't, going off to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer. I'm not talking about those guys. I'm talking about the people who are still down in their log cabins or whatever, out there in the woods, out on maneuvers, hunting squirrels.
No, I wouldn't even say I would even backtrack on that point. I would even backtrack my comments and say I doubt that they're even misguided. As long as they're, as long as they're functioning within the boundaries of society and with law and all that kind of stuff, I don't see them as being deluded. I see them as having a lifestyle, right? And that's not delusional. When you cross the boundary into abducting a governor or bombing a federal building in Oklahoma City, that's when it becomes a whole other basket of shit.
Right. Yeah.
No, I don't see. Yeah, that's a whole. I don't see. Which, by the way, those guys came from Michigan too. But just anyway.
Woo! Yes, Michigan. It's the people.
Yeah. Pure Michigan.
Pure Michigan. Yeah.
So I'm just saying, that's a whole other conversation.
Holy shit, a good one too.
Your basic run-of-the-mill guys who consider themselves to be part of a militia, or the militia movement. I think they're probably very diligent about their beliefs, but they function within the norms of what's expected of them, right? And if things go out of control, they might step out, right? If there is a civil war, you'll probably see more of these guys. But until that happens, I think they're probably just practicing out in the fields, doing what they do, doing maneuvers, or out shooting squirrel, whatever. I don't want to say that I don't think they're crazy. I don't think just because you're in a militia, you're crazy. I don't want to be quoted.
I think on some level, I would go as far. I don't know at what point I would stop using this descriptor, but I would say at some level, I think they're even rational. I don't think they're crazy at all. I think that they are seeing indications of something that really is there. Now, are they applying too much to it? Are they seeing maybe aspects of it? Are they seeing contrasts or a brightness level, a volume, an amplitude to the problem that maybe is overinflated, exaggerated? Maybe.
Maybe.
Very possible.
Yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting to sit down and talk to one or two.
I have a few. I have a few, and they don't talk about Jesus, and like I said, and they have a very specific.
I think most of these groups are more about, they're not about religion necessarily, although they tend to be religious. But their groups aren't about that. Their groups are more about politics and the overreach of government. These groups, I think, tend to read or understand the Constitution literally, right, word for word. They're not applying any sort of interpretation to the words of the Constitution. And when they detect any kind of overreach by the government, that's when their hackles get up, and that's what their biggest fear is. Very old school American.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that was a phrase that I used to use a lot, was constitutional fundamentalists. Like, you've got the Westboro folks down here, the biblical fundamentalists, and then you've got the constitutional fundamentalists over here, sort of like the Tea Party types, right? They were wearing tea bags dangling off their wide-brimmed hat 10 years ago.
Yeah, they're not crazy. These people aren't crazy. No. They're not delusional. They just have a set of beliefs that may or may not fall within the norms of most beliefs.
I don't know. I'm really torn on these guys because I do know some of these folks personally. They won't tell me. They don't trust me, and they probably shouldn't. But I do know them, and I don't want to say it. I don't want to give them quarter. But if I'm being honest, I do understand some of what they're purporting to fight about or want to fight about. And if the world does go to shit, if this country goes to hell after the election, I'm not 100% sure I don't want them there. I'm not. I'm not.
No, that's very honest, I think.
Yeah. I mean, if you have a sort of a power vacuum or something, or the fight for the American religion goes into full gear next year, and the left decides to finally, or the far left decides to finally assert itself. I can tell you this. I probably shouldn't say this. I may regret it later on. I reserve the right to change my mind. But if it came down to a choice between Hitler and Stalin, between the far left and the far right, I'm going to side up with the far right. Until the far left is pushed back into the sea. And then what I'm going to do? I'm not done. Then you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to turn into Benedict Arnold. I'm going to turn on these guys. I'm going to join whatever is left to push those guys into the Pacific.
Just broom the whole bunch of them.
That's what, and hope to God something's left.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time the left has stood up, right? You remember you've read about the Weathermen, I'm sure,
Yep.
in the 60s, and their I think it's Chicago, their bombings in Chicago. That was extreme. That was extreme side of the left.
Yeah.
Those people are still around. I think a lot of those guys are still alive, and women are still alive.
Yeah.
There was a documentary about them not too long ago, a decade ago maybe.
Yeah, it's good.
But it's a good documentary, but these things aren't mutually exclusive. Any sort of extremism. I think the theme of and I'm running out of steam, but I think the theme of what we're coming up today is that any extremism is not healthy, right? If you're going to be a fundamental extremist of any sort, whether it's a religious extremist, a congressional or a constitutional extremist, political extremist, it's not healthy. There's some sort of an intervention maybe needs to be done on these individuals.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to reiterate, despite what I just said, I mean, I have no empathy, sympathy for any of these people that were plotting to kidnap Whitmer. I can kind of sense how somebody could take what I just said and twist it around and throw it at me. I just don't.
No.
Don't do that this week. But so I hope the book gets thrown at them. I hope they're thrown in federal prison for the rest of their lives. I really
Terrorism charge. It's not a good charge.
No, and it's accurate. It's an appropriate charge, and I hope the book gets thrown at them.
Yeah, I think that's a really great sort of I think a basic distinction that we're really trying to make is there's a difference between a militia and a terrorist group.
Yeah,
and these guys were a terrorist group. Fuck their whatever their militia was called, if that's what they want to call themselves. That's not what they were. They were a group of fucking thugs, and trying to create kill police officers and all this shit. I mean, come on, give me a fucking break. I think that these kind of guys are a pox on the militia name. They're just not. They shouldn't be used in the same sentence.
They do have a right. The Second Amendment is entrenched. It's written in constitutional stone. It's not going anywhere. You're not going to be able to overturn it. You're not going to be able to tell them they can't have their guns anymore. They do have a right in this country to have those guns. And the poorly worded, well-regulated militia line in the Constitution. How is it regulated? How is hootery regulated? How is the weenie watchmen or whatever the fuck they call themselves? How were they regulated? Where's the regulation? I don't think that they meant that some kid could come in off the street and say, I regulate thee are now regulated. I'm not sure that's how they fucking intended it. I think it meant government regulation. I think. Could be. So
yeah.
There's
Keep
so
the
much
government out of
so much fucking stupidity everywhere. God, now I'm getting angry.
I know it's extreme. It's extremism.
Yeah.
Hey, if you want to join a militia, you go, boy.
Yeah.
But once you become a terrorist, fuck you.
Yeah, exactly. 1, 2, 3. Let's say it in unison. 1, 2, 3. Fuck you.
Fuck you.
All right. I think this is a good place to stop down, brother. This is a full politics episode here.
Yeah, we did pretty good.
Yeah, we did. I think we did. It's amazing.
Great place to stop.
Great.
Well, there it is. That's episode number 91, Escaping the Cave podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. It's a little bit later on now. I typically go back and tag these things up, kind of wrap things, maybe some things that I missed or whatever, and I desperately wanted to go back and find that Walter Lippmann quote about the responsibility that comes with free speech. Turns out it was sitting right on top of the pile of papers right next to me. Had I looked, I probably would have found it. Anyway, this is it. I think it's from The Public Philosophy. And he says, when the chaff of silliness, baseness, and deception is so voluminous that it submerges the kernels of truth, freedom of speech may produce such frivolity or such mischief that it cannot be preserved against the demand for a restoration of order or decency. If there is a dividing line between liberty and license, it is where freedom of speech is no longer respected as a procedure of the truth and becomes the unrestricted right to exploit the ignorance and to incite the passions of the people. Then freedom is such a hullabaloo of sophistry, propaganda, special pleading, lobbying, and salesmanship that it is difficult to remember why freedom of speech is worth the pain and trouble of defending it. The public philosophy. End quote, by the way. 1955, Walter Lippmann. I implore you to read Walter Lippmann. But that's it, isn't it? Where freedom of speech is no longer respected as a procedure of the truth and becomes the unrestricted right to exploit the ignorance, incite the passions of the people. Hullabaloo of sophistry. Propaganda, special pleading, lobbying, and salesmanship, Mr. Trump. It's difficult to remember why freedom of speech is worth the pain and trouble of defending it. Need I say more? Actually, yes. To the conversation we were having about the religious mind of the socialist, how socialism is, in my view, a literal religion. I didn't even mention the main deity, the socialist sky daddy, the imaginary invisible god of justice, cosmic justice. Always seeking a subjectively interpreted and defined justice. Yes, it is subjectively interpreted. It's abstract because justice is a human concoction. It doesn't exist anywhere outside of the human mind. Therefore, human beings have to agree on it. Or it doesn't exist at all. If you don't believe me, I challenge you to find justice in existence outside of human endeavors. Ask the infant who got killed in a house fire last week somewhere. Ask the gazelle who's being chased down by a leopard somewhere. Justice does not exist outside of the human mind, and when you destroy the agreement, when you destroy the cooperation, the common definition of it, the only thing that exists is power. Might. Be careful with that. And there's also an aspect when you're talking about justice, which is fairness. Fairness and justice are one of the same thing. That's the fairness twitch that I think Brian was referring to when he was describing his take on right-wing extremists. How they're obsessed with fairness. How their life isn't fair. How something about life is unjust. How they're a victim. That may be an aspect of right-wing extremists, but it's a main tenet of the socialist religion. Fairness, justice, something that doesn't exist outside of the human mind. I've got a lot more on that topic coming. This is a big idea. I told Brian today, I asked him to sort of, dissect it for me when I get it done. I've asked Chris to do the same thing, or if I haven't, I'm going to. Hi, Chris. But this is a foundational thing for me personally. And I suspect that as time goes on and life moves forward, and events around us continue to happen, continue to take place, and the landscape presents itself into 2021 and beyond, where I end up residing on that idea, that fundamental idea, is going to affect a lot of things for me personally. If I'm forced to choose, as I said in this episode, between Westboro Baptist Church and ISIS, if I've got to choose between right-wing extremists and left-wing extremists, I'll choose one temporarily to fight against the other. And then I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be a traitorous MFer, the former enemy of my enemies. There's a great quote somewhere, I forget exactly how it goes or who said it, but the only enemy is totalitarianism. The only enemy is authoritarianism. I would expand that out to say the only enemy is extremism, radicalism, regardless of what side it's on. The refusal to negotiate, the refusal to compromise, the refusal to see the country and the world as belonging to all of us rather than belonging just to you in that moral certitude with those moral imperatives that lead you to self-righteousness and drag you onto the field of the fanatic. Fanaticism, extremism, moral imperatives. Moral certitude, all talked about last year when I was discussing Jacques Ellul's book. And if you're looking for some more material, some other episodes perhaps that I recorded that talks about some of the same things that Brian and I discussed today. I've gotten into the religious mind, the general religious mind several times. Episodes number 36 last year, number 71 I think earlier this year, definitely got into it. I've also talked about the Manchurian Propagandists a number of times as well, numbers 31 and 37 from last year. I have 91 episodes that I've recorded. The vast majority of them concern this topic one way or another. And all this material is connected. It has different topics, different focuses, but it's all connected, and not very loosely. It's an entire field of study. And I think this is the battle of the 21st century. This is the great war of the 2000s. And it's a formidable enemy we're girding our loins for battle against. The enemy of our own minds. I am off next week, taking a well-deserved, overdue vacation, heading out to the great Southwest. Desert life, some mountains, woohoo! I haven't seen mountains in a long time, I desperately need it. So no Todd, no Brian next week. However, I may take the computer out there and finally edit and re-release some of those episodes that I was talking about that I've been promising you for a month and haven't delivered on yet. I am sorry. Not very reliable in that regard, am I? I shall do my best. One other thing, if you like this podcast, if you find it useful, find it valuable, think if it's a useful resource for you, share it. You are my marketing team. It's the only way it's going to spread. Word of mouth, yours. You know of somebody who likes it, maybe just needs to hear it, or would like it, or just needs to hear it, probably should hear it, pass it their way. Por favor. EscapingTheCave.com is the website. Forget Facebook and Twitter. You don't need it. Nobody needs it. And I will talk to you in about 2 weeks. Till then, so long.